Hey guys, welcome to the 14. I'm Nick Cole, and we're breaking down all of the Week 8 SEC football games from a betting perspective. Today, we're talking about the Mississippi State Bulldogs visiting the Vanderbilt Commodores. This game's going to be played on Saturday, October 23rd at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 3 p.m. local time in Nashville. The game's at Vanderbilt Stadium. It'll be televised on the SEC Network. The opening line on this game was Mississippi State minus 23, and it's moved a little bit as the week's gone on. It's down to the Bulldogs being favored by 20.5. The over-under opened at 52.5. It's down to 51.5 as of this video recording. Bring in our betting analyst, Christopher Smith. Christopher, this is the game on the small SEC football slate this week that you're most looking forward to, right?
Oh, definitely. And the thing that we just discussed right before we started recording this is that depending on the health of the quarterbacks in the league this weekend, of the 4 SEC versus SEC games, we could see 7 quarterbacks with backup from the preseason. You know, the 7 quarterbacks that the starter is either out or very injured. And so that includes this game, which we'll get into. But why don't you let us know the weather as well as the injuries, and then get into Nick's news and notes.
Sure. We'll start with the weather in Nashville on Saturday. At kickoff, it's going to be in the low 70s, and we'll be in the 60s by the end of the game. 5 to 7 mile per hour wind, so nothing too much to worry about there, and no real chance for rain. On the injury side of things, you know, spoiler alert, we're looking at quarterbacks on both sides of the field here. We'll start with Mississippi State. Their starting quarterback, Will Rogers, sprained his AC joining us Alabama last week, but he finished the game. He's considered day-to-day, and the reports out of Starkville are sort of mixed on whether or not we'll actually see him play or not. Mike Leach has kind of held that close to the vest, so we'll have to, you know, watch this into Saturday, maybe hours until kickoff, until we actually find out whether they're going to be with or without their starting quarterback for this game. On the Vanderbilt sideline, we've got a little bit more finality to it at this point, we think. Last week, starting quarterback Ken Seals missed the game with a finger injury, and he's supposed to miss the game as well this week. That means they'll be turning to sophomore quarterback Mike Wright, who started the game last week against South Carolina, who nearly led the Commodores to an upset victory against South Carolina. He was not quite as accurate as Seals is, but he averaged over 1.5 yards more per passing attempt in that game against South Carolina than Seals has for the rest of this season. So something to look into if you're thinking about Commodores maybe putting up some points this week, how he factors in there. Also a factor with running the ball a little bit, Mike Wright. And then I would just say for the long-term outlook for Ken Seals, Seals actually co-hosts a podcast with Chris Lee, who is obviously with Southeastern 14, but also Vandy Sports. And they talked about that a little bit on this week's episode. And it sounds like a really frustrating injury for Seals that makes it kind of hard for him to know when he's going to be back on the field. He says his day-to-day activities are not impacted by his hand injury, but he can't grip a football. And so until he can grip a football pain-free and that kind of thing, there's not much chance of him being cleared to play. So we'll look at Mike Wright being the starting guy this weekend. News and notes wise, otherwise, I mentioned it just a minute ago, but Vanderbilt may have just had its best chance to win an SEC game this season, and it kind of slipped right through their fingers. In week 7, they went to South Carolina, who, if you watch our shows at all, you know we're not very high on, and they almost came away with a victory. They lost on a last-minute touchdown drive by the Gamecocks, and really I think that game will be defined more about what the Commodores didn't do the last time that they had the ball than the fact that they gave up a touchdown at the end. But on the Mississippi State side of things, they're also coming off of a loss that probably left a bad taste in their mouth, but for a different reason. They had number 1 Alabama come into their place, see if you could come after Alabama. It seemed like a lot of things were falling in place to try that, and really none of that came to be. They lost 49-9, and their quarterback got hurt in the process. They were down early, down often. Not the type of play that you were hoping to see from the Bulldogs, who have now lost a couple games here. I think it was 3 of their last 4, Christopher, rolling into Nashville in need of a win if they're wanting to get to bowl eligibility this year. So from a betting perspective, what do you make of where both of these teams are at, and what do you take away from their latest week 7 losses?
Yeah, so you mentioned the South Carolina Vanderbilt game, and I've had South Carolina a clear 13th in my power ratings in the SEC this season, starting before the season. And I was kind of getting to the point where I was having to debate Missouri and South Carolina a little bit. But I guess once you get down that far in the league, you'd rather have an offense that can score than one that can't score. So no matter how bad Missouri's defense is, I'm going to go with Missouri now. And the game against Vanderbilt last week totally solidified that in my mind. So no disrespect to Vanderbilt against Mississippi State and Missouri, but that may have been their best shot at an SEC win this year, and they may not get another good shot. So definitely a gut punch loss, I feel like, for Vanderbilt last week. And then Mississippi State just got rolled against Alabama at home. And you mentioned they've now lost 3 of 4. And you look at before the Alabama game, this Mississippi State offense from the efficiency standpoint was really good, as efficient as I've seen a Mike Leach offense in quite some time, even go back to the Washington State game, days. So it's not great if you're not good at tackling and coverage when you're facing a super efficient, high completion rate, timing offense. But I think if there was not a QB issue at Mississippi State right now, this Bulldogs offense should be able to pick apart Vanderbilt. But there is a QB issue at Mississippi State. And before the season, South Alabama transferred Chance Levertich, which is the backup to Will Rogers. Mike Leach said during training camp he was less consistent and less familiar with the plays than Will Rogers. And remember, Rogers last year struggled early a lot, actually. So I feel like there may be the biggest downgrade in the SEC at quarterback at Mississippi State, going from their starter to their backup. Maybe a bigger drop off than at any other spot in the league. So I definitely think it's hard to handicap this game without knowing, is Rogers going to play? How bad is his shoulder affecting him? That kind of thing. And Mississippi State's rush defense is much better than its pass defense. So you mentioned the quarterback change at Vanderbilt because of the injury. Well, Will Shepherd has had some pretty big plays in recent weeks for Vanderbilt down the field. And I feel like maybe Vanderbilt has a chance to bust a few here because Mississippi State's rush defense is better than its pass defense is. So maybe there's a shot with a quarterback who, has looked at least maybe a little bit more prone to explosiveness when he played last week. So we'll see how that goes. But Nick, who are you betting on this game, and who are you taking on the total?
So, we're always really honest with you guys on the show about whether we're actually putting money on a game or not. When we're making picks, we have season-long picks that we track. We track ourselves to hold ourselves accountable to how well we pick the league. I would say this about Week 8 SEC in general. Mentioned earlier in this video, there are a lot of quarterbacks that are uncertain, a lot of key players for some teams on a very light schedule. There's 5 total games this week. So more times than not, I find myself shying away from making an actual substantial bet on any of these SEC matchups this week for various reasons. And in this scenario, I feel that way because of Will Rogers at Mississippi State. Now, we may find out between the time we recorded this video and the time the game's played that he's good to go or he's definitely out. And if that's the case, maybe you adjust how you feel about this game. But from a standpoint of placing money on things, I'm not betting either the total or a side on this game until I know more information. But for the purposes of making our picks for this game here, give me Vandy plus 20.5 and the under 51.5. I think that the Commodores may be able to keep it somewhat close at home, but I don't expect either of these teams to run up a big total. How are you feeling about it?
Yeah, I'm with you. Vanderbilt plus 20.5 and under 51.5 are what I'm putting down for the record. But there's no way that I'm betting on this game, side or total, without knowing the status of Will Rogers. And it's not only the status, it's not, if you told me tomorrow that he's definitely playing in the game, that would change nothing for me because it's not whether he's going to play. It's also how effective is he going to be if he does play. And I think we saw he played the rest of the game against Alabama, but he was not effective at all. And you saw him grabbing his shoulder after every play. So to me, it would definitely change my opinion on maybe the under, maybe the side, if I knew that Rogers was going to be 100% effective in the game. But there's not going to be any way to know that unless he's either going to be out before the game, which we might know. But if he's slated to play, there's no way we're going to know how effective he's going to be, at least until the first couple of drives. So to me, if you're going to bet this game, maybe you watch and see how Rodgers looks if he does play early on, and maybe it's a live bet. Like maybe if Mississippi State has a drive and Rodgers looks healthy the first drive, but they have to punt and Vanderbilt scores a field goal or something like that, then maybe it's a spot you live bet Mississippi State on the side. But outside of that, it's not a game that I can see betting on either the side or the total. But hopefully we both come through and get a cash for our season-long records. For Nick Cole, I'm Christopher Smith for the 14, and we'll talk to you next week.